Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got, I guarantee, one of the most interesting conversations of the year for you. We have on the CEO of Relevvo, Aashish Dhamdhere, and we're going to talk about, get ready for this, why you shouldn't get seduced by intent, but what you can do. Now, Aashish, I'm going to turn over to you. Your background. I want you to explain a bit more. This is your fifth start that you're starting here, right? And there is a reason why you started this startup. And I want you to explain what that is and a little bit more about your background before we get into things here.
Sounds great, Steve. Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity. Really excited to have this conversation, very timely conversation in so many ways. As you mentioned, this is my fifth startup, the first that I've co-founded. The other four startups, I've done growth, marketing, sales roles. And in each one of these companies, I've struggled with my team to figure out, off our TAM, what are the companies that are in market right now? What are the companies that actually care about solving this problem? And I've had to hack together solutions to figure this out. And the reason it matters is if you figure out this population, this 5 to 10% of your TAM, that's what I call in market, you find product market fit faster, you can scale product market fit faster, and you can grow more efficiently because you're talking to people where you're most relevant. Hence the name Relevvo, and that's what we've been building. I'm excited to talk about this concept of in-market and intent and how to navigate this together with you.
Well, fantastic. Let's dive right in, because finding out who's in market to buy, one of the number one things that we do as marketers and CMOs is that if we look at who has that intent, right? Who is interacting with our content, thus showing greater intent, greater propensity to be in market today. That's the way that kind of the world works. How does the world work according to your point of view?
Yeah, intent is very powerful. So let's start there. And it's a very powerful concept, and it's definitely something you should look at. So by no means would I ever say don't look at intent, but it's important to look at intent in context with the bigger picture and everything that's happening with your prospects. There is a buying journey that prospects go through. And if you buy into the Challenger methodology, there's problem definition, solution identification, requirement gathering, and then vendor selection that comes out of it. If you rely solely on intent, and we should probably double click in this first party and third party intent, what you are assuming is that all the demand that you need to generate has been generated and you're harvesting demand, because that's what you're doing with intent. You're saying the people that are raising their hand in some way are the only people that I should talk to. And that's seductive, and it's also a trap. Because if you're a marketer, your job needs to balance demand generation with demand harvesting. In particular, if you're going to harvest demand, then you should focus on harvesting the right kind of demand. That's where you want to talk to people, not just anybody who's downloading a white paper on your website, but people who've downloaded the website that fit your ICP, that fit the use cases that you're solving for, that are actually trying to solve the challenges that you solve. And it's that combination that can be extremely powerful. The trap I see people falling into is they'll say, well, they're showing intent, let's give the leads to the sales team. Please don't do that. It's the 100% surefire way of losing credibility with the sales team, because they'll reach out and in a bunch of cases, they'll get blank stares or no responses. So just a little bit of context for this conversation.
Well, that's why there's kind of a joke going around, right? It's like, hey, as the CMO, I just threw 1,000 MQLs over the wall to you. What are you crying about? Those MQLs were people that displayed intent, right? They filled out a form. They did something to self-identify. So why wouldn't we want to talk to them? And what you're saying is that's not the greatest qualifier for those that are in market to buy the solutions that solve the problems they're looking to solve. So
exactly right.
So how do we get to that? What's the magic in the formula, and how do you look at this? What's your perspective?
Yeah, really good. I'll give you one example, by the way, of how intent can lead you astray. We had a security customer that got really excited because they thought that there was this one particular academic institution, and they sell to academic institutions, that was really interested in their solution. And then they went and talked to somebody there and figured out, oh no, what had happened is that a particular professor had asked one of his classes to go investigate this product as a piece of technology, and a bunch of students had shown up and downloaded stuff and signed up for trials for their product. So that was a huge issue. And that's just one issue of a lot of false positives. I would say that the 3 or 4 challenges with intent data: one, false positives that you have to be careful about, separating the wheat from the chaff. 2, it's very hard to figure out the why behind intent. Why did these people do this, right? Why did they take the actions that they took? What motivated them? And if you know that, that's going to lead to a better conversation. The third piece is you're getting intent data at the same time as your competitors get that intent data, which means there's a feeding frenzy that erupts when that data gets released to you. And now that means you have to cut through a lot of noise to reach your prospects at that point. So what do? Really, you need to solve for all of these things to have something that performs better. One is you have to understand where the prospect's at today. And your ICP is a tremendously powerful framework construct to help you understand that. The challenge is for most companies, ICP is shelfware. You'll spend a ton of money, time doing this work every year, every 2 years, and then it just doesn't get put to work. And because there are no good tools that you can use to track ICP fit, true ICP fit that goes beyond firmographics and technographics. So if you really want to do ICP, you have to look at firmographics, technographics, use cases, challenges, buying triggers. And that combination gives you companies that truly care about the problem. Then when you layer on intent on top of it, that can be super powerful, especially if it's first party intent, if it's based on activity on your website, attendance at events, et cetera, or even engagement with the sales team in some way. That combination combined with fit can be super powerful. In market plus intent is a recipe for success. But in market alone is a great starting point to generate intent that then leads to success. Those are the 2 equations that people should consider.
So do you have a real world example of how this works? Because the marketers, we're supposed to be good storytellers. So we love hearing a good story ourselves.
Totally. I'll give you an example of a company that sells HR onboarding software. And on their website, any number of people show up and interact with the content. People show up on the review sites and look at content. But if you're selling HR onboarding, a few things to consider. We should talk about why focus matters before we go into this. And as budgets and headcount have reduced dramatically in the last year for most CMOs, you're working with 50% of the budget that you had and 50% of the teams that you had in the good old days, as I call it, which means it becomes extremely important for you to focus on a smaller set of accounts, smaller set of activities, smaller set of campaigns. You can't peanut butter resources across a lot of things. You're not going to get the results that you were getting. This old playbook of spray and pray is gone, which means you have to focus. So where do you focus? Now let's take the example of the HR software company. For you, you're selling onboarding software. The first thing you want to look at is who's hiring or who's hired a lot of people in the last 3 months, 6 months, whatever, because those are the companies, those are the teams that need the most help. The second thing to look at is where are the HR teams small and the number of employees really high? Where is the ratio off? And that combination tells you now they're hiring a lot of people, they don't have enough HR people. 3 is maybe you integrate only with a certain set of systems. Let's find out companies that only have those systems. That becomes signal number 3, right? 4 is where have they hired a new CHRO or a new VP of people, chief people officer, because they typically come in with a new strategy or set of things that they want to roll out. The combination of these 4 things and intent together, super powerful, right? Massively valuable. Let's say you've got somebody who's downloaded a white paper and they have no open jobs and they haven't hired anybody in the last 3 months. They might still be interested in your technology, but should you really focus there? No, that would be a bad place for you to go. So that's a contrasting example of how fit plus intent can be super valuable.
Oh, I love that. What I'm thinking as you're saying all this is that there is the data out there to allow us to make better decisions. If you look over the past few years, you look at the Deloitte Touche, the PricewaterhouseCoopers of the world, they talk about digital transformation, and they talk
Yes.
about that transformation from the business of today to the business of tomorrow. What you're saying is there is so much digital data that is out
Yes.
there and ready for us to grab a hold of and use. And we've been seduced by these big intent engines, and that's the way to go. They're interacting with us. Now, I'm going to ask you a loaded question because most of the time, the intent data is based on the content that we produce as companies that
Yeah.
we put out into the marketing place. I want to just ask you up front. I ask this on all my podcasts. What is your thought on the overall importance of data? And I'm going to frame it this way: importance of data as it contributes to the overall growth and sustainability of the company. 1, it's not important at all. 10, it's vital to the overall growth and sustainability of the company. How would you rate that and why?
Yeah. What a great question. I would rate it extremely high. 10 is where I would go. I'll tell you why it fits the mental model that we've been talking through to this point, which is you want to get to your prospects when they're early in the buying journey as much as possible, which means they're either in the problem definition or the solution identification stage from, again, the challenger methodology. And those stages, your prospects are looking to educate themselves. They're wrestling with some hard problems that they're trying to solve. If you can help them define the problem better, if you can help them consider the options or the solutions better, all of which can only be done through content that you've created, you build credibility, you build trust, and you end up being the obvious answer when time comes for them to pick a vendor. All of this can only be done through content. So you have to invest in content, and it has to be tied to the buying journey. And it's something, what's the magical thing, tying this back to your earlier point, is you now have the ability to read digital body language in a way that you just could not before. Intent was the first wave in many ways. We rely on a ton of AI. AI is a core part of our system. And that helps us track millions, billions of these digital body language points, data points across millions of data sources for hundreds of thousands of accounts, which you can then tie back to specific pieces of content. That combination is extremely powerful. You can now understand prospects at a level of granularity that was just not possible. That goes way beyond the behavioral, which is intent. Somebody raising their hand. That's a start. You can really get to understand the pains and problems that your prospects are trying to solve. If you write content that speaks to those, you'll make a connection. You'll build a bridge of relevance between them and yourselves, and they'll walk over to your side, and you'll end up becoming partners.
So I'm now to the stage of, okay, how do I incorporate this into my marketing workflows? How do I use it? Where does it fit in? How do I do that?
Yeah, the most important thing here is you shouldn't expect individual sellers or marketers to figure out what companies are in market. This has to be done upstream, and it's a strategic thing that has to be decided at the company, the CRO, CMO, CEO level of what is our ICP. First, let's all agree on it. Because this age-old, cliched, terrible thing of sales saying, you're giving me terrible leads. And again, to your point, marketing saying, I give you all those MQLs. The key disconnect is they're not on the same page about ICP. What sales thinks is a great prospect to go after is not what marketing thinks is a great prospect to go after. That alignment can be done on the ICP framework. Then you can put that ICP framework to work to create a list of accounts that can be distributed across the sales and marketing teams. Some that the sales and marketing team can work together. Others that only one of those teams work. Tied to this is content investments, which is when you figure out what your ICP looks like, you'll also get a sense for where they are in the buying journey. And then you can figure out, well, how do we go after people that are in this particular stage? What personas? What are the key messages that map to them? And what are the key content investments that we need to make there? It's going in that format. It's going in that journey together, which will help you align resources across the company and then make the right investments right after that.
That makes good sense. One of the things that I'm thinking about is when you're talking here is, I had a conversation a couple of months ago with the CMO, and I asked her, how many ICPs do you have? She said, well, we have about 8 ICPs. And then within the ICPs, we have different industry segments, right? And so all of a sudden, this matrix of ICPs emerges. And the very first thing that I'm thinking is you've got way too many ICPs. What that does is that basically it says, I don't know who my ICP is, so I'm going to cover the board. What would your recommendation be to somebody that says, I have my ICPs, I know who they are? What would your recommendation be to them if they don't hone that down to the very few, the priority ICP?
Let's go back to what we were talking about 10 minutes or so ago, which is time's come to focus on key segments. You just don't have the resources anymore to do too many things. So you have to pick what are the top segments, as I call it, to go after. Let's assume for a minute that you only have one product that you're selling. It's possible you have different use cases for that product. And it's also possible that those use cases span verticals, and that for each vertical, you have a set of personas. So you can see how that can get really complicated really quickly. The genius, as they say, is in simplifying things, and really the hard call that CMOs have to make, and there's an art and a science to it, is picking, do we go the use case route or do we go the vertical route? In some cases, because if you go the use case route, you can span. The other approach might be you go the persona route, which could also span verticals. What you have to figure out is what's the approach where we can balance personalization with reach, and what if the sweet spot in terms of that intersection that gets us the results that we want. In that context, if you have too many permutations and combinations, you end up a peanut butter spread of resources that doesn't give you the impact that you want. On the other hand, if you have a message that's too generic, that's also not going to appeal. So the sweet spot is in figuring out 3 to 5 segments where you can have custom messages that speak to the pains and the needs and the challenges of the prospects, the verticals and the use cases that appeal. And it's by playing with those 3 or 4 variables, that you end up with the right answer at that point. Too many ICPs is as good as not having any, because ideal, there's supposed to be the word ideal in there. If you have 8 ICPs, that may mean you don't have one. You don't have any one at that point.
This question relates to exactly what you're saying here and what you were talking about earlier. I think I know what you're going to say as an answer, but as marketers, going back to the very title of what this episode is in terms of don't be seduced by intent, our thought is, geez, but our ICPs can represent a very large segment, right? And so if we're spending and we're doing campaigns out and all we're doing is looking at intent, within that world of intent, there's going to be people that are in market to buy, right? That's the way that we've always done this. So that's the pay and spray, right? We're just going to cover enough that we're going to get these people. Maybe I don't know how to get some of this data, the other data that we're talking about here, right? When I have too many ICPs, well, I don't know which are the priorities really, right? Because I talked to the salesperson and this salesperson says this ICP, somebody else says this CEO says it's this ICP, right? Instead of placing a bet and saying, I'm just going to go with the ICP that the CEO says, or I'm going to cover everybody and I'm going to look at my intent data and I'm going to go after those people. So that's the way the world's worked here, right? What is your point of view on that?
Yes. I have a feeling that this will hit home with most CMOs as they listen to this. The world changed dramatically in the last year. And we'll look back at the last 10 years, maybe 15, and say, wow, those were the glory days of growing at all costs. And maybe they'll come back if interest rates go down again at some point. But everybody's forced to work with dramatically smaller teams and dramatically smaller budgets at this point. And in some ways, 2023 was a mulligan year, because every company was just trying to survive and just get through the year. And so CMOs were given some space to cut their teams, to cut their costs. Many companies, I should say, grew 1%, 2%, single digit growth, when the expectation was doubling, tripling last year, or at least 20% plus growth. 2024 is not 2023, clearly. Expectations have changed. Boards are coming back to CMOs and saying, great, this is the year where we need growth. And CMOs have a hard choice to make, which is you've given me way fewer resources, but the growth expectations in many ways haven't changed from what they were, which means I have to make some smart bets. If you try to run the old spray and pray playbook with 50% of resources, it's a sales funnel, right? It's a sales funnel with a lot on the top and you get a little at the bottom. You shrink that top, there's not going to be much left at the bottom. You run this playbook, you're looking at a very hard conversation 1 or 2 quarters out. The CMO job, for my money, is already the hardest job in SaaS on the go-to-market side. You get a year in the best of days. If you don't get this right now, this is one of those existential threats to a CMO, is they need to get this right. They need to figure out where to focus, and they need to get this combination of in-market and intent right in that context.
So basically, if I boil it all down, what you're saying is we're tasked with doing more with less. So we have to be smarter about what we're doing in order to get more out of less.
Exactly right. Couldn't have said it better.
The only reason why we haven't been doing that is because things have been working. We had been going after pre-COVID, like incredible blockbuster economies, and things were rising and things were good. Yet you tend to get fat, dumb, and happy, right? When that happens. There's all kinds of articles that have been written over the last couple of years about having to do more with less. The problem is we don't always have the strategy to do it. So
Yes.
if you could succinctly, in a few short sentences, what is your recommendation for doing more with less?
Yeah, it's the path of least resistance. That's what you're looking for, right? You've come at a world where you don't have as many resources as you did, which means you have to pick the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is finding people that have the problems you solve, as opposed to trying to sift through many people to find the diamonds in the rough, if you will. You have to change this equation. You have to flip this model where you started with a lot of sand and then you filtered it down to the little pieces of gold, to getting smarter about where the rich veins of gold lie based on needs, challenges, use cases, buying triggers, reading body language, right? Become smarter prospectors in that model, where you may have fewer pickaxes, to keep going on this analogy. You may have fewer bulldozers, whatever. Now you can put them to much smarter use and get a higher yield, because your conversion rates at every stage of the funnel are going to look way better, and you're going to reshape the funnel. You may not start with as much on top, but you'll still end up with way more at the bottom than you did in the old model, because you have better conversion rates and you've been smarter with content, with audience selection, with tying in intent in some places too, to get the results that you need.
Fantastic. What haven't we covered on this topic? Because you speak on this a lot. You're very passionate, right? You started this company. You've been in our shoes before. What else do we need to know? What are we doing wrong? How do we need to reorient? How do we need to reframe the way that we're thinking about this?
Yeah, this is a step function change. Most people haven't truly absorbed yet. Many have. Like, we worked with a lot of companies that were ahead of the curve in so many ways. What's interesting is PE-backed companies got here way before anybody else, for obvious reasons. The scrutiny of budgetary spend there is much higher. But everybody else, you have to absorb the fact that the world has changed, which means your playbooks have to change. And unfortunately, it's one of those situations where if the playbooks don't change, you will have to change, meaning you won't be there anymore at some point in these organizations. So I would encourage all the CMOs to embrace this change, to harness this change, and to ride this wave, because in many ways, it's the best of days. There's a lot of new technology on the horizon that makes this process simpler. You have the ability to learn way more about prospects than you did in the old days. You can put that to great work through content and experiences and events and campaign strategies to get amazing results. But you have to make that change. You have to make that leap. And you'll end up, this process of allostasis, and they say you'll end up in a much better place. Embrace this change yourself and across your organization. And it's going to be great.
Well, I have one final question for you, right?
Yes.
And it is that, because we've talked about a lot here. And if there was maybe one takeaway that you wanted folks that are listening here to remember from watching this podcast, what would that be?
Yeah. Remember that your tribe, your in-market accounts are your most valuable prospects. These are the people who truly care about solving the problems that you solve. If you grab onto that one concept, that's a very powerful concept that can change your marketing results, your marketing strategy, and that can help you reach the right people at the right time with the right message. I think that's the most powerful concept.
Fantastic. Well, Ashish, I have to tell you, and you've given us all a ton to think about. And I know there's a lot of notes that have been taken here. If there were questions that people had that they wanted to reach out to you and ask questions, would it be appropriate that I gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile or something like that?
Absolutely. I can also give you my email address. Reach out. Clearly, as you said, I'm passionate about this topic. I'm always super curious to talk to other CMOs, get their perspectives, learn from them, and share whatever we've learned as well.
Fantastic. Well, just a big thanks for coming on and sharing and enlightening us and really having us think a little bit differently about how we go about solving the problem, especially doing it in a world of shrinking budgets and doing more. So thank you for coming
Thank
on.
you so much for having me. Absolutely. What a great conversation. Thank you for having me. A pleasure.